You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. That's me. So let me touch on a subject that I think is really, really important, especially in the 21st century. What is it that I'm going to talk about? Well, I've been talking about relationships, and I've talked about stuff about what's good management, what's good leadership, and I'm going to pick up with this particular podcast with the consequences of our current social climate. Okay, what's our culture really like in terms of our expectations, demands, and deliveries? Well, if you haven't quite got it, then let me ask you a couple of questions. It's Sunday night. Are you feeling apprehensive or anxious about getting up in the morning and going to work? When you get to work, is it a struggle to stay focused, to concentrate, to really pick up on the thread of things, to feel motivated, to feel focused, right? So, yes, by this stage, some of you have guessed it. What I'm going to be talking about is that absolute current cancer that a lot of people experience. And it's not the physical cancer that I'm talking about. It's this thing called burnout, when we feel like we're on struggle street despite looking really good on the outside. So, burnout, eh? So, begin with, let's actually get a handle on what we're talking about with respect to this, what has become a burgeoning problem in our society that is only marginally being addressed. So, a good definition for burnout is that it's fundamentally a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that occurs when you or I experience prolonged periods of stress or frustration in our personal and or professional lives. A lot of times it can manifest as a lack of motivation. It's often part of reduced productivity. And a lot of times it's about feeling hopeless and cynical. Now, what I want to point out and really, really stress is that burnout just doesn't happen to certain professions or, to individuals in certain professions, right? It can pretty well occur in any profession or in any personal situation. But where we've come to really identify it, and where it's most commonly associated to, is high stress occupations like healthcare, social work, and teaching. But I want you to think about this a lot broader. Okay, this is, that whole thing about, you can only experience, burnout if you're in one of those intense professions like medicine, psychology, psychiatry, and teaching. I mean, out of all of those, I think teaching is probably the one where I take my hat off to people, especially because not only is it tricky dealing with, little terrorists and their more grown-up versions called teenagers, but you got a system, especially as I said, in the United States, in the UK, and in Australia, that is really pushing the envelope with regards to what the demand of teachers are and what's expected of them. Okay, so one of the things that I want to throw in is that in burnout, one of the things that happens is that my experience of the demands and expectations of my environment exceeds my belief in being able to meet them. Now, in some instances, it's not just my belief, it's reality. I cannot actually do it. I cannot meet those external demands and expectations, on any level. So, how do I pick up when I'm actually burning out? Well, let's talk a little bit about the symptoms of burnout. Okay, so one of the main or the common presentation is that sense of chronic fatigue and low energy. So you go to bed, you have a rough night, you wake up in the morning, you still feel like you've been hit by a truck, and you sort of wonder, well, what happened to my sleep? Okay, now in some instances, sleep's also disturbed by dreams that contain situations of aggression, violence, or anxiety, fear. Another symptom that's really important to recognize is that when I'm having difficulty concentrating or making decisions, now pay attention to this, when I'm not hungover, that is also a sign and a symptom of burnout. The other one that comes along, and in the last session you heard me talk about, what are some of the indicators of an unhealthy work environment, and I talked about job satisfaction being low and morale. In this instance, one of the things that's going to be impacted in me is my sense of satisfaction in what I do. This is where I see people walking away from jobs like teaching, like medicine, like psychiatry, like social work, like psychology, psychotherapy, because they just don't have the emotional and physical resources to apply themselves. Even though in some instances, like in psychotherapy, I could argue that in a lot of instances the job's not necessarily that demanding. People who come to see us are not necessarily that demanding. Some are, but in a lot of instances, it can offer a great deal of satisfaction. Another symptom here is that we often, when we're in burnout, experience irritability and moodiness. So if our partner starts tapping us on the shoulder persistently, going, "Why are you so cranky?" rather than dismissing that person, I should probably stop and check in with myself and do a bit of an audit. All right, so how emotionally regulated am I at this point in time? Is my mood really up and down? Do I move from anxiety to anger to feeling flat to feeling depressed to, not having any energy? Just do I want to bite the cat's head off because it somehow ran across my feet? These indicators are very, very important. We often write them off. Oh, I just, need to get better sleep, or, I need to do some more exercise. I need to do some relaxation, some mindfulness. All those things in of themselves can help, and we'll talk about this a little bit later about, what can you do as you're moving into burnout or you are burnt out. All right, we'll talk about that. But right now, I want you to take a sort of bit of a stock take here. The other part of it in burnout is a loss of interest in activities that you've previously enjoyed. And yes, guys, one of those is sex, affection, those intimate moments where we actually begin to avoid, people. Because again, all we're experiencing often is that they're just expecting more stuff from us and we can't, deliver what they want, and therefore we feel bad. Now, interestingly, we're not just talking about psychological, emotional symptoms. I want you to think about this more broadly. So, for example, a lot of the stuff that happens in burnout is actually, related to what's going on physiologically. Okay, so the more stressed you are, the more likely you are to overuse adrenaline. And after a period of time, if that overuse of adrenaline is chronic, you're going to get elevations in cortisol levels. So that means that there's an increase in muscle tension. There's an increase in inflammatory processes throughout the body. So connective tissues in the muscles are more prone to being inflamed. Mucous membranes throughout the body are more likely to be inflamed. One of the more common symptoms that I get from a lot of people who are burnt out or are burning out is that they get diarrhea and they keep attributing it to food or food allergies. But in a lot of instances, it's closer to home than that. They're stressed to the max and they're burnt out and they're trapped in a behavior pattern that doesn't allow the body to really recoup. Stomach issues, heartburn, reflux. For some people, it's not diarrhea that's the problem, it's constipation. And yes, Freud had a bit to say about that when he talked about being anally retentive, right? In some instances, it's the increase in muscle tension translates into things like pains in the wrist or in the elbow. So there's a whole range of physical symptoms. Obviously, when we're in a chronic state of stress and often distress, we're not going to have much of a libido either, right? So that's really, really important. As I mentioned earlier on, in addition to all of this, the nail in the coffin is that we then have massive sleep problems. Can't get to sleep, or we get to sleep okay, but we're up 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning like the lights have been turned on, and my head's buzzing with irrelevant ideas, or ideas that are relevant but should be thought about the next morning. Okay? So, let me talk through what we can do about it, okay? Because we can do quite a bit about it. And unless you're in a superbly toxic work environment or relationship, then you may need to think about leaving that context, okay? Because it's not just, you. It is actually you and the situation that you're in. I always love it when, people come to counselling or therapy, and they've been talking to their boss about feeling like they're burning out. And the first cab off the rank is, you need to do some meditation or you just do some breathing and you'll be right. No, that's like a Band-Aid on an arterial wound. Eventually, you are going to bleed out, just more slowly. Okay? So in today's work culture and family culture, one of the things that's really, really important is to check your level of activity between work and what you do at home. Now, one of the things that I often get told is when people keep a track of that is that they actually never have any downtime. They take a 15-minute sort of sample for a couple of days, and what they find is that there is no rest period in this. Yes, they go to the gym. Yes, they go to bed, but they're not actually really resting. So one of the things that's really important is to take time off from work and other stresses in your life and engage in stuff that you find enjoyable and relaxing. So in my case, it was always heading out for a surf. Ocean is my therapy. Once I hit the water, all thoughts about what's happening on land is left behind on the beach or on the, reef. Think about doing things like, reading a book for pleasure, not for work, going for a walk or spending time with someone that you love and feel safe with. The next thing that you can do is you need to learn how to set boundaries. Really, really important. Most of us think we're setting boundaries, but a lot of time they're vague and fuzzy and ambiguous. So, those people who are trying to persuade you that there is no work-life balance or that, work and life are just constantly intertwined, they really don't know what they're talking about. We need to be able to switch off. As a parent, even, I need to be able to switch off from time to time. Let grandparents take over for a couple of hours or maybe the afternoon or a weekend. And, you and your partner just head off. Do something for yourselves. The next bit is you got to really get into a pattern of practicing self-care. Most of us schedule our work meetings in before we schedule in self-care times. I don't have time to do X, Y, Z. Well, if you're going to operate on that principle, you need to be aware that you're using a strategy that's meant for a sprint, but life and work is a marathon. So guess what's going to happen? You're not going to get to the finishing line, either literally and physically expire or psychologically. So you need to, and I can't stress this highly enough, you need to make sure you get good quality sleep. So that is contingent on sleep hygiene, sleep duration, and sleep quality. So those three things you need to check out. Okay, you need to improve on those. You need to have a good diet. Drinking 2 bottles of wine is not managing your burnout. And I'm talking 2 bottles of wine a day. Okay, that is all that's going to do is get you into a place where you're going to need to take time off because you're going to be in rehab. Okay. You also need to put some time aside for exercise, but exercise is not relaxation. In fact, one of the things that I often have to differentiate, especially with men, is you can flog yourself in the gym, but that's really stressful. There are certain cultural, social demands and expectations about how we perform at gym. And given the fact that most of us are still really competitive little bunnies, we're going to go way above the, call of duty and then feel fatigued and exhausted, and it's going to take us a while to recover. One of the indicators there is that you're going to become injury prone. Okay, so if you don't want to spend a lot of time sitting it out on the bench, when you're burning out and you're taking care of yourself, reduce the amount of intensity that you put into a gym workout. If you do a reasonable workout, at the end of it, sit down, cool off with some abdominal breathing and progressive muscle relaxation, and give your heart a chance to come down. Another important aspect in this phase is that there's nothing wrong in seeking support. Now, you might do that from friends or family, but look, let me put this to the pointy end of the stick. Talk to a mental health professional about this. We're trained to be able to differentiate these, burnout from other conditions. A lot of times people come to see me and they go, well, my doctor says, I'm anxious or I'm depressed. My immediate question is why? Now, a lot of times what I discover is that when I look at the context that that person's in, I discover that they're actually probably burning out or burnt out. And so that's when we need to do some stuff that's really, really important to help them back on their feet. Finally, let me talk about something that's really important. Think about your priorities. Ultimately, you can be the richest person in the cemetery and the youngest one. Okay, this is not a good way to go. Friends, loved ones, all of that, to my mind, give us the emotional and physical resilience that we need to live in a culture like ours. I've said this once before, most of us men live at least 5 years to 7 years longer when we're in a healthy relationship with a healthy network. So let's work on it. So just to sum this up, managing burnout means that we need a combination of self-care, support, and changes to the underlying expectations and the underlying demands that we're experiencing. Now, sometimes those demands can come from the inside out. Right? Think about it. And so take a proactive approach. And until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.